Today, I'm joined with Rob McLeod from Nations Royalty. Rob, thanks so much for joining us live.
Great to see you in person, man.
Rob, let's talk about Nations Royalty. You guys recently went public here in Canada. What's the reception been like?
So there's two groups. There's of course shareholders, which include our by far largest shareholder, the Nisga'a Nation, our second largest shareholder, which is Frank Justra, and many other high net worth long-term investors that have completely bought into what our vision is going to be. They are all very supportive. And the general investors, there's a bit of curiosity, there's a bit of cynicism from some, because there's nobody's seen a company like this before. Often in the mining business, it's the adversarial relationships between mining companies and Indigenous people that get all the press. It's not necessarily the positive stories and certainly the positive economic contributions that mining can give to Indigenous people that get all the press. The response from, which is our major priority, which is to grow the company, from other Indigenous groups to our vision for Nations Royalty and our leadership in what we call economic reconciliation and capacity building for Indigenous people, has been phenomenal. We are advancing discussions on over 40 different fronts right now. These are all with different Indigenous groups around the world. We are at capacity within our own team of executives to continue with this corp dev, so we are looking to grow on that side. And we are looking still forward to a very busy year of announcing other transactions for Nations Royalty. So it's been quiet on announcing transactions, but we're not going to announce anything until they're done.
Now, are you guys commodity agnostic, jurisdiction agnostic? What's the mandate here?
So we've certainly ranked different commodities in terms of priorities. And same with royalties. Like, we are, first of all, looking for top-line royalties, primarily in the precious metals or energy metal space, as our highest priority. But we will also talk to any Indigenous group that is interested in partnering with us, almost regardless of the commodity. We are looking at agricultural products. We're looking at oil and gas, metallurgical coal, all sorts of commodities, particularly in Canada. And Canada is a big country that produces a lot of different things. We're looking at nickel. So we do have our priorities, but if an Indigenous group has been consulted that have a benefits agreement with a royalty, we will look at them, and including in clean energy as well too. Uranium, it's the basket of potential royalties that can go into nations is quite large. Now, we are also, Canada's the primary focus, but we, as of this recording, we've got a crew that is down at Diggers and Dealers Conference in Australia that are meeting with Australian Aborigines about Nations Royalty and the possibility of being part of it. Just some initial meetings, but we are looking globally, but Canada is still the focus.
Okay, Rob, I don't mean to get you all fired up here, but we've chatted with some of the companies that you guys have royalties with, and they often seem a little bit skeptical about your business model. Why do you think that the skepticism exists?
So we're the by far the largest majority Indigenous-owned public company. And we're also, if not the first, one of the first. So there is, and I mean this maybe more, it's more in a naive way for those CEOs that are skeptical, that it's institutionalized racism towards Indigenous people. They don't think that Indigenous people can handle the ups and downs of the stock market or the capital markets, or being able to execute on a public company. It's a reality. I've seen it. I'm a white man. But, I've sat across from anywhere from portfolio managers to the well-known CEOs. And it's actually been heartbreaking for me to hear what certain people think about Indigenous people. And it's fired me up, as you say, to prove them wrong. And the support that we've received from other indigenous. There's a lot of indigenous people that don't have royalties that in the mining or energy space, but are standing by cheering nation's royalty and the indigenous people behind it to be a success. And so, to those that are cynical, watch us. Watch us transact on these royalties that will allow indigenous people to crystallize all of that value of those royalties into shares today, to be able to diversify particularly the nations that might just have one royalty or just be exposed to one commodity, to be exposed to a basket and to remove some of the risk that can come from single asset operations. Like, look at the unfortunate situation that happened with the operator in the Yukon. With those nations, or that nation up there, is that had you been exposed or been a shareholder, you wouldn't have those the value of that royalty go to zero.
Now, Rob, you guys are chatting with First Nations groups, I imagine, all over Canada. And we recently had a little bit of a tragedy in the Yukon with Victoria Gold. There's various companies that are public in Canada that are operating out of the Yukon. Do you think that what's happened here with Victoria Gold has created tremendous roadblocks for mining in the Yukon?
It certainly isn't going to help a lot of the operators up there, and that's not to trivialize it, but it's terrifying, for nations that rely on subsistence and rely on things like fisheries. It is, and you put in trust in a mining company to be able to operate, that has been broken. And so it's going to be up to both the operator and the industry up there to be able to change it. Like, I've been in touch with nations up there that have a vested interest in seeing mining go ahead. You need revenue. They're blessed with tremendous natural resources in the territory. So, is it going to kill mining in the Yukon? Not a chance. You still will be able to permit. You'll be able to operate, but there's going to be a healing period that's going to go along with it, and allow investigations to happen, and to learn from what's been a terrible industry tragedy. But yeah, I'm adamant that the industry is still going to carry on strong. The tradition of mining in Yukon dates back to 1898, and I think it will continue.
So I was chatting with Sean Kuhn today of Dolly Varden, and he was telling me how much he respects you as a geo and all of your history in the Golden Triangle. So, Rob, could you tell us a little bit about your history and your family's history in the Golden Triangle and all of your history with mining?
Oh yeah, I'd love to, and I love mining history. I love the part of the world that I grew up, which is the mining town of Stewart, BC. My dad was an underground miner. His dad, my grandfather, was an immigrant from Scotland. Both of them ended up operating our family business, which was a hotel and bar business, and it's part of the old legend that in the mining business, it's often the bartenders that get rich and the miners that go broke. And so my dad was smart enough to get out of the mining business while the going was good, and operated what was a really good family business for us. But his stories and his friends, who particularly old timers who were the pioneers, were inspirations for me to get into the mining business. As was my uncle Don McLeod, who he was a mining promoter in the 70s through 1990s. And developed mines in the Stewart area or advanced projects. The Bruce Jack mine, which he named Bruce Jack Lake after his son, my cousin Bruce McLeod, and my grandfather Jack McLeod, is just a testament to some of our family history there. And I worked there as a geologist. I worked there, at the Premier Mine as a mill operator. And then later, as a CEO, my company, IDM Mining, was acquired by Ascot Resources, which they are developing the Premier Mine and have in their pipeline the Red Mountain Project, of which Nations Royalty is a holder. And so, I've followed other companies, whether they're exploring today or the discovery history of spectacular deposits such as Eskay Creek. That's where my home is, and I know the geology up there probably better than almost anybody. And then finally, where it ties into Nations Royalty, the mutual and multi-generational family respect with the Nisga'a people is what led to the creation of our company. My dad was very good friends with the Nisga'a, and when he was mayor of Stewart, and worked with a lot of the Nisga'a leaders working together for the Pacific Northwest in the 70s and 80s.
So for you to get involved with Nations Royalty, it's not really a question of we just found a CEO who ticks the right checklist. It's personal for you.
No, I truly give a shit. I want to see the Nisga'a people. They've always been leaders. Whether it's for Aboriginal rights and title, or the first modern treaty in British Columbia, it's only fitting that the Nisga'a are going to be the founders of what we believe will be a top 5 global royalty company when we execute on this company. So my dad helped he ran the campaign for the first Indigenous person ever elected to any legislative body in Canada, and that was in 1949. Like, Indigenous people couldn't even vote until after World War II. And so the first person ever elected was a guy named Frank Calder, who, like, if you built a Mount Rushmore of Indigenous leaders in Canada, Dr. Frank Calder would be on there. My dad ran his campaign in 1949 and supported him in politics, and is a very good friend up until 1979, serving 30 years for the Outland riding. So Nisga'a have always been leaders, and my dad helped a bit, and I hope to help a little bit too in terms of building this company.
Okay, so one of the royalties you guys have is on the KSM property. I think that the KSM property is one of the most interesting stories in all of mining. We have a project here that's got, like $500 billion of value in the ground, but it's kind of in a bit of a remote area. There's a lot of skepticism that the project will ever get off the ground, but it looks like the company's moving it forward. We've chatted with Rudy before on our show. So I've got to ask you, Rob, can you give us an update on what's happening there? Do you think it's going to get to production?
So it has, over the past month, it has really advanced on a critical permitting front. It is the world's largest fully permitted copper gold deposit. 50 million ounces of reserves.
Yeah, reserves.
Yeah, let alone resources. There's probably you can add on a lot more, but they've spent just on capital developments over the past couple of years is over $400 million US, and what they've done is early works construction. So they've been building roads and camps and power lines and substations, and to prepare for the large build. And if I'd have to guess, it's probably a $10 billion, capital project. But by doing that, they have locked in their Mines Act permits in perpetuity. So what happens with most modern permits or environmental assessments that are issued by the provincial government and EIS by federal governments is they expire after 10 years. So you have to do what's called substantially start construction. Otherwise, those expire. And so by having that in place, and this is quoting the CEO of Seabridge, Rudy Frank, is that now that element of risk is gone, and they are currently in discussions with multiple large diversified miners on potential joint venture or partnership, and they're optimistic that they can get something done before the end of the year. And so there's a lot of cynics about it, and there should be. It's a big part of the world. it's you're going to be traveling up there to see. There's mountains and there's glaciers, and it can be a challenging area to operate. But there's very few consequential copper deposits, in particular, globally, for the big diversified miners to build in areas that are lower risk politically. And so KSM is the largest value within the nation's royalty portfolio, and for good reason. It's those type of multi-decade long, big mines that make big royalty payments. Those are the foundations that was the foundation for Franco-Nevada.
What's the big hurdle for Seabridge, the owner of the KSM project? Is it just a matter of funding?
It's finding the correct partner that will give their shareholders full value. It's where if it's one of the big diversified miners that either want to buy the company, Seabridge has a $2 billion market cap. So either buy them or partner it up and then commit to the $10 billion and that would require to develop it. And of course, all these companies will balance the political risk, no matter what jurisdiction that they're looking at. And KSM, from a lot of American NGOs, actually had tremendous amounts of opposition. Like after the Pebble project got stopped up in Alaska, a lot of them kind of turned their eyes to KSM. But there's two nations there, Tahltan and Nisga'a. And both nations, that's their traditional territory, they want to see that project built. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed off on the benefit agreement. So it is, but it is an interesting one. Like you don't see a lot of banks they don't cover Seabridge because it's so large. You can have such swings and variation in value. Yeah. Is that it makes it really difficult for analysts to be able to put a value on it.
It seems to me like, if I want to put on my equity analysis hat for a minute, that there is tremendous upside to the KSM project. Now, from my view, it could be a 10x even with unfavorable financing terms if they can actually get to production.
Yeah. It's the biggest of all optionality plays out there. Optionality like Donlin Creek is one, or Casino up in the Yukon. The large undeveloped projects, or those that have more political risks like SolGold, and all these cost billions and billions and billions of dollars.
But there's another way to get exposure to the KSM property, and that's through Nations Royalty. Rob, last question for you. If I'm an investor or a potential investor, what am I looking out for over the remainder of the year?
So, look, everybody's looking for when is our first transaction going to be announced? And of course, we can't talk about that. But once that proof of concept comes out, once we announce that we have a new Indigenous group that is going to vend in their royalty for shares, I think people say, yeah, okay, they're starting. But then when we follow it up with another one and another one, that's when I think the investors are really, really going to get on board. And it's where we've been looking at smaller transactions, and then some of these, the NAV on these royalties, they're hundreds of millions to $1 billion. They're substantial. So there's a lot of punts that we're looking at. It's like having a drilling program in the Carlin Trend in 1982. Is that you have the chance of finding a lot of really, really big opportunities just if you're aggressive. And so that's going to be the real test for investors to show that we're walking the walk by getting more Indigenous deals done. We are going to continue to grow our management team, and again, part of a pillar of our company is to try to have as many Indigenous people as possible in management and at the board level. So we may look to augment, it's such an important part that really resonates with with First Nations across Canada that it's great to see some Indigenous people in leadership positions in mining companies. So we'll continue to grow on that aspect as well too, building out the team.
Rob, thanks for doing this. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.